I never felt at home in the academic culture, even though I succeeded at higher education. And eventually I understood that part of the reason for that, maybe the biggest reason for that, was that academic culture is so highly individualistic and competitive.
Parker J. Palmer, author of The Courage to Teach, founder of the Center for Courage and Renewal, explores how great teaching starts from the inside.
I set out to be a medical student, to be a doctor, because that's what my parents wanted. I flunked organic chemistry. It was a horrible failure, but I discovered something better.
Tell me, what is it?
I think everyone knows that the worst kind of teaching is where people are just phoning it in. They're standing up there behind the podium, but they're somehow not really in the room.
It's like I'm faking it. Why is vulnerability so important in our role as educators?
That's the great gift of being honest about your experience and about who you are to the extent you possibly can. To be able to show up in the world with your own truth without being ashamed or embarrassed by it. Know that you are valued. Know that you are treasured. Know that you are loved. I don't think there's a more important message for anyone to embrace and understand. Keep breathing, keep loving, keep teaching. We need you.
Oh, what a gift it was for me to have this conversation. Parker, this moment is really over a decade in the making. Ever since I started Breathe for Change in 2015, I have absolutely dreamed of starting a podcast. And Parker, you have always been and will always be my greatest hero, my greatest mentor. And I remember back in 2019, at that point, you and I had the privilege of, meeting up in our cafe in Madison, having these beautiful conversations with each other that deeply impacted my life. And I knew that year you turned 80. And I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I've got to capture this conversation that I've been having with Parker. And you were so gracious and let me record that conversation that we had that year. And I dreamed of being able to share your words and your message with the world. And now here we are, 7 years later. I'm finally launching the podcast, finally. And you have, for some reason, decided to go against all of your rules of no more public talks, no more interviews, no more podcasts, so that you could be here and have this conversation with me today, which I am so grateful for. And I would love to start with, why did you decide to say yes and decide this was a good idea to show up for me and for all the educators who will eventually listen to this conversation?
Well, my dear friend, it was a no-brainer, absolute no-brainer. So when I knew who was asking me, and I knew that she was a very good friend, and I knew she did work that I deeply admire, as do so many people around the country and around the world, um, it was an easy yes. I'm just delighted to see you again. Delighted to have a chance to talk about where our lives and our work have taken us to this point. Thank you for inviting me to be your guest. I'm truly honored and delighted.
Well, you were my number one guest for the last decades of my life. I'm like, okay, if I start a podcast, who is it going to be? Parker, Parker, Parker. You've just influenced my life so much. And I am so excited to have this conversation with you. And so, I deeply believe that you and I see education in a similar way, which is why we're so connected and why we've done what we've done and we continue to do what we do. And one of the things that resonates so deeply with me about how you see education is like you've often said that knowing, teaching, and learning are communal enterprises, right? Not these solo endeavors. And I really think that, like, for so many of us who've experienced school or who are experiencing school, that's just not the case. It's so often competitive and isolating and lonely. And I'm just curious, thinking way back when, decades and decades and decades ago, like what first opened your eyes to this idea of like a communal nature or approach to learning? And like, why do you believe relationships and community are such an important essence of education?
Well, there's no question that you and I look at education the same way, Ilana.
Mhm.
Um, I've often felt and often said that when you meet someone who feels like a friend very quickly, it's very likely that you and that other person are on this earth for something like the same reason, that you're somehow in the same force field of vocation and purpose and meaning. And that's certainly proven to be true with you. I think what pointed me um, toward the communal nature of education was, first of all, the fact that I never felt at home in the academic culture. Um, I could write that off as a reflection of the fact that I was the first person in my family to go to college, and that may have had something to do with it. But even though I succeeded uh, at higher education through undergraduate and graduate work at Berkeley, where, as you know, I did my PhD.
Go Bears!
Yeah, go Bears for sure. Um, Despite all of that, it always felt like alien territory to me. I felt like a stranger in a strange land. And eventually I understood that part of the reason for that, maybe the biggest reason for that, was that academic culture is so highly individualistic and competitive. And I was always a serious student. I was studying philosophy and sociology and intellectual history. And it didn't take me long to realize that the greatest advances of knowledge, all the great advances in knowledge itself, had come from community, communities of people sharing a focus on a certain subject, sharing a set of ground rules and protocols about how to approach that subject, and coming together and then flying apart and then coming together again with new people in the circle and constantly revising um, what we end up calling the facts. The facts are never given and stable. They change from one generation to the next, and rightly so, because that community of inquiry keeps expanding and drawing new eyes and ears and voices and life experiences. And so, of course, what people understand about the world changes. And occasionally those changes get ratified as, okay, this is our new understanding of physics or of English literature or of political science or sociology. I- one of the things I came up with fairly early on as I thought about all of this is a definition of truth.
Tell me, what is it? What's truth, Parker?
I'm glad to let everyone know what truth is.
Please,
So
we all need to know.
as an operational definition that has served me well, truth is an eternal conversation about things that matter, conducted with passion and discipline.
Mm.
So, an eternal conversation about things that matter, conducted with passion and discipline. The discipline is important. The passion is important. The ongoing nature of the conversation is important. But if you think about that for a moment from the point of view of teaching, it's simply not enough to teach students the conclusions of your discipline at this moment as if that were the whole story. If you want them to be practitioners of your discipline, you need to teach them how to participate in that eternal conversation. And that means how to listen, how to ask questions, how to be skeptical, how to be affirmative, how to deal with the diverse range of viewpoints that are present in any one of those circles at any one time. And so while it doesn't say while it definitely does not say that you can nail the truth down, it says something more important. It says that we can prepare people to be the next generation of participants in a conversation that never stops, and thank God it never stops.
Or else we wouldn't be here.
We wouldn't be here. We absolutely wouldn't be here, and our views of so many important things would be, you know, as they were in the 5th century or the 14th century or whatever date you wanna choose.
You're reminding me of, at Breathe for Change, we talk about these unique skills that only us have as humans, like human intelligence, right? The social components of our capacities, the emotional, the somatic, our understandings of our body and what it's telling us, and how do we make sense of the world around us, the and engage in these critical conversations that are so important. And those skills are foundational to education, right? It's like, why aren't we prioritizing that in education? That's what education is really about.
Yeah, exactly, and by the same token, why aren't we seating people in a circle and saying, "Okay, let's talk to each other. Let's look at the subject in the center of the circle. Let's see what we can figure out about it. What do you think, John? What do you think, Susie?" Um, and how do we hold those differences in a creative way that allows us to grow as participants in that conversation? Why do we not do that, but rather sit people down in isolation in rows, deliver factoids into their heads, ask them to feed it back to us at the end of the term, and call that education? It really isn't.
You're reminding me of when first really got exposed to this more democratic approach to education. It was also at UC Berkeley, and I was running for student body president at the time, and I was told, "Take the easiest classes because you gotta go do your campaign." And I signed up for this class called Ed 190, Current Issues in Education, and it was structured completely differently than any other course I had ever taken. It wasn't like a teacher, inputting all the knowledge into students sitting and just listening, right? It was all of us were sitting in a circle. There was 40 students from all different backgrounds, and we learned about the issues in education, like, racism, you know, classism, gender issues, all of the issues in education through each person sharing their own story. And you could learn about these societal issues that are fundamentally impacting the nature of our future through literally having conversations. And it's like my eyes opened dramatically to the injustices facing uh, you know, different populations and how that was showing up in schools. And that was the most like transformational educational experience I had ever taken. So much so that I ended up teaching that course for the next 3 years. And then it inspired me to figure out, how do I facilitate this kind of community-based education with young children, because we got to teach our youngest kids these skills. And so that's why I became a pre-K teacher.
Uh-huh.
And I remember at the beginning of every year, I'd ask my 4-year-olds, like, what does community mean to you? And one day, Patrick, my little adorable Irish kid, said, well, in a community, first you have to love yourself, because if you don't love yourself, you can't love anybody else. And I was like, what? And it immediately reminded me of you, Parker. I wrote it, furiously on the board, and I still say that quote to every educator. Thousands of educators know Patrick's quote because it kind of speaks to that very important the very important words that you say, like self-care is never a selfish act, right? It's simply a good stewardship of the only gift I have, the gift I was put on earth to offer others. So can you talk a little bit more, Parker, about like why is it so important for educators to take care of their well-being, to nurture their inner life? And this is what you've stood for your whole career. And like it's, especially in such a burnt out, stressful profession. Why is that so important?
Well, it's such a big and important question. I wanna loop back for just a moment to your description of that course at
Mhm.
Berkeley, where you said some magic words that I don't want people
Oh, okay, take me there.
I wanna lift up these words. You said this was a class in which everybody had a chance to tell their story, and out of that shared storytelling, that shared autobiographical exercise, the learning was deep and wide about so many issues that touch our lives, learning that you've carried into the present day.
Mhm.
That's another thing we don't do in conventional education is we don't pay any attention to our students' stories because we somehow see knowledge as a separate thing from the story of the student. And of course, that ends up with a lot of people living unexamined lives, unillumined lives, lives that you can examine and illumine only by sharing them in the company of thoughtful people, where you can look with each other at what's going on with me? What does my history say about who I am and how I am in the world and how I look at the world and what I'm capable of knowing or maybe not capable of knowing because of the blinders that come with all of our life experience. So I just want to lift up the fact that the best kind of good education, I think, is education that tells the big story of the disciplines, of course. That's critical stuff. But it does so in a way that illumines the little stories of the learners. And the little stories of the learners warm up the big stories of the world in a way that makes them fit for human habitation. And there's so much, I think, in that kind of dialectic, that back and forthness, that's worth paying attention to. So, to go to your primary question this time around, um, I truly believe that true self, what Thomas Merton called true self, is the most important and meaningful and effective gift we have to give the world. You know, if you look at me as someone who simply has a head full of information that other people might benefit from, but has no personal agency that's related to that, um, a self that can somehow be set aside so that I can deliver that information as purely as possible, then who cares about self care? As long as I'm sober when I teach, as long as I'm more or less in command of my faculties, which sadly is the condition of some professionals who don't pay attention to their own needs. But if you say, well, wait a minute, what's really happening here is that we're working when we work with each other, we're working with people who have invested their lives in a certain kind of experience or a certain kind of quest for understanding, meaning, and purpose. And we need to know, we need to have a sense of who it is we're dealing with, as well as what it is he or she has to say. And as we get deeper into that mix of not only things people know, but who people are, we find it more possible to grow into integrated persons ourselves and to to be present in the world, to show up present in the world in the fullest possible manner. One of the contrasting points I've sometimes made to clarify this is that I think everyone knows that the worst kind of teaching is where people are just phoning it in. At least in my generation, that was a phrase people used. They're just phoning it in. They're standing up there behind the podium, but they are somehow not really in the room.
So it's like faking it's like I'm faking it.
Yeah, I'm faking it, or I'm holding the whole enterprise at such arm's length, maybe because I'm scared,
Mhm.
maybe because I don't wanna be there, uh, who knows why, but I'm holding it at such arm's length that essential human connection cannot be made. The relational trust that makes teaching and learning come alive and flow is absolutely absent because there's no one there to relate to. You can't build relational trust with a body full of abstract academic knowledge.
Well, I wanna name Parker. I wanna name that this is one of the reasons why I love you so much, is I think you are an educator who has deeply embodied what it means to be vulnerable
Mm,
and to show your whole self, not just the positive parts of you, so to speak, that you think people might want to hear or your students might want to hear, or the world might want to hear. But you've also been really candid and open about some of the darkest times of your life and the three phases of depression that you experienced that you've named have been so pivotal to who you are and who you still continue to become. And I just would love, for you to speak a little bit more to the educators listening to like why is vulnerability so important in our role as educators? And if you could even paint what it actually looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like in a classroom setting or in an educational context so that we can all learn from your beautiful modeling.
wow, thank you.
It's so true, Parker. I'm like,
Well,
"Okay, what would Parker do?" And then I'm like, "Okay, blah." All right, here I am. Let me give you all of me. So that's really what you know, that's yeah, it's incredible.
that I recognize myself in that. Thank you. Um, in that, because I do love to do that. Um, so let me just tell you a quick story as a step into these waters, because I think ultimately the waters get pretty deep. So maybe, take us up to our waist or something as we go into this pool. Um, I once had lunch. I was doing a faculty workshop at a large research university, which is where I spent 40 years of my life traveling around the country doing that kind of thing. And at that lunch table, I was sitting with 7 men, as it happened, all of them professors at the university. And at some point, the conversation turned, I think because one person told a story,
Hmm,
it turned to uh, courses we had taken in college because we thought we wanted to enter a certain profession, but courses at which we failed, which turned our lives tragically and then positively in a direction for which we were all ultimately grateful. So everyone at the table had some sort of story. I set out to be a medical student, to be a doctor, because that's what my parents wanted. I flunked organic chemistry. It was a horrible failure for me and my family. But I discovered a love for 19th century English literature, which I'm now teaching and which has sustained me ever since. Everybody had a story. Everybody
mhm,
had a story of failure that turned in a new and creative direction. I had my own. So as we were getting close to the time to break up and go back to the plenary session of my workshop, I said, let me ask you guys a question. How many of you have ever told that story to the students in your class?
Can I guess what the answer was? 0.
0 is the correct answer. Yeah, you nailed it. And I said, "Please, in the name of God, go back to class, tell that story someday, because you have students sitting in your classroom who are paralyzed with fear of failure. And they need to know that you not only failed and lived to tell the story, but that you are thriving on the other side because of what you discovered from that failure. So to me, that's an example of appropriate vulnerability. Um, I I think it's important to put an adjective like appropriate on this because no teacher wants to be vulnerable in a way that scares his or her students. Like, oh my God, are we gonna have to take care of this person? Is this person falling apart on us? You have to maintain the authority that allows people to trust you to continue to hold the space for education, right? But when your own struggles, your own failure, in my case, my 3 deep dives, devastating dives into clinical depression, where day by day I wondered if life was g ever gonna be worth living again, and wondered about ending it right now because it didn't seem likely. Um, you know, to be able to bring that into public discourse without scaring people and making them feel like you're gonna fall apart, you have to integrate it into your sense of self. And to me, that's the great gift of being honest about your experience and about who you are to the extent you possibly can. The gift is to be able to show up in the world with your own truth without being ashamed or embarrassed by it. The gift is to feel like I didn't waste all these years I've had on earth by failing to show up with who I really am and what I really have and what I've really learned. Um, and when you are able to do that in an appropriate way and in a way that helps the conversation along, in my case, opening the door to more intimate sharing on students' parts who suddenly realize, oh, he's been there. He knows what this is like. He's creating a safe space for me to speak vulnerable truths about who I am and how I am, then the payoff is immense. And education reaches so much deeper than, as you know, Ilana, reaches so much deeper than information, theories, etc., uh, into the lived experience of being an educated person. We learn things in so many different ways, and some of the hardest learnings of life, and therefore the most important learnings of life, don't come in the classroom. They come through life experience. But if we can bring that life experience to the classroom, magical stuff happens and everyone benefits.
Totally. And, I think the beauty of working with just thousands of educators all the time is this is possible with any age of student, whether they're 2 years old, they're 5 years old, they're 10, they're 20, they're adults, they're educators themselves. It's like, how do we create that sacred container where, like you said earlier, the truth can come out? And it's like giving space for everyone's unique truths to show up in the community. It's like then there's like collective knowledge that's formed through that process.
Yes, exactly. And if we can just work for a moment with the word sacred, it's always seemed to me that the most sacred experience I've ever had is when someone puts a piece of their life in your hands and says, "Help me look at this." Or when I do that for other people, and something happens where people realize we've just, we're now in the pool farther than up to our waist. We've gone all the way in. This is a full immersion in living and learning, which is always, I think, the ultimate goal.
in our programs at Breathe for Change, we use these different protocols. Like our equitable sharing protocol is an opportunity for like a group of people to each have an equal amount of time to share whatever is present for them. Or there's mindful listening protocol where some someone speaks, their truth in response to some vulnerable prompt, and then the other person reflects back what they heard them say. And just even having the space to be heard is such a gift, because so often we just push, 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 push everything down, 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 and it's like stored inside our every cell in our body, and that turns into stress, it turns into pressure, it turns into depression. And so whether it's, you know, creating space for people to be heard, or also learning to actually mindfully listen and take in someone's story and and develop those empathy skills that are so crucial for teaching and learning, like all of that, I've learned from you is so important in education for our students, for our teachers. And if we could continue creating a future in our classrooms and schools where that's possible, where like students don't just think, I have to go fill out that math sheet today or learn letter M and just write it 1,000 times until I get it right or like approved. It's like, why don't we just have a conversation about what these things mean to us?
Yeah, exactly, and we know, and you know very well, that, that kind of learning, that rote learning you just described.
In one ear, out the other. Goodbye.
So absolutely, and, we teach reading in a way that makes people want never to read a book again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You have done such a brilliant job, through Breathe for Change in operationalizing these principles. That's what I so deeply admire in you and other educators I know, who not only sort of grok the principles, uh, but who also have a very keen sense of how to put them into practical action. I call it putting wheels on ideas,
Mm.
and I've that's always been an aim of mine, and it just thrills me to work with folks like you who know how to do that in arenas and realms where I wouldn't know how to operate. I mean, ever since we got online, I have to tell you this, Ilana, I've been grinning to myself over one of my favorite photos of all time, which is a photo of you and me, um, taken at one of the, gatherings where we did some work together, where I am, copying you in a yoga pose
Oh, this one, the tree pose.
that, is a very
Oh, it's the
simple
best.
simple elementary yoga pose, and that you very kindly allowed me to lean up against a wall so I could pull it off, and it just makes me grin inwardly to think about, you know, how you've moved into an arena that I barely understand and just done so much good work with these ideas.
I will never forget when you showed up to that Madison training, and I think it was in 2017. There was like 100 educators there, and I was like, "Hey, everyone, guess who's coming?" And they're like, "No way, no way," because Parker, you are integrated into all aspects of our curriculum. Your books are in our curriculum, your quotes are in our curriculum. Obviously, you're all over my PhD and written in my dissertation everywhere. And they all screamed at once, like, "Parker Palmer?" And I'm like, "You bet." And so I would love, you my I really see myself, I'm 47 years younger than you are. I did the math this morning, and, you're 86 and I was born in 86, so let's just say that, right? And, your books, your words have just so deeply resonated with who I am and who I want to become as an educator and what I wanna share in the world. And so I really see myself as like living on your legacy and knowing like you're coming towards the end of your career and I'm kind of in this like exciting start, so to speak, or in the earlier phases of where you were almost 50 years ago. And so I just am so curious, like what goes through your mind when you see, we've trained over 20,000 educators. And I don't even think you know this yet, but this last year, we graduated our first two cohorts of our Masters of Education program. So now we're in higher ed,
Oh, wonderful.
which is incredible. We already have hundreds of graduates in our Masters of Education. And we're just at the precipice. It's going to, our intention is to really make an impact in teacher ed all over. And you're kind of this, like, inspiration behind it all because, like, you are so deeply rooted in who I am and who our team is now, and I'm just curious what it feels like for you to, like, see, like, come to these trainings or just know that tens of thousands of educators have been certified really in your approach and kind of this, like, legacy that you started and that pioneered, and now we're taking it on and continuing it. So what does it feel like for you?
Yeah, well, obviously it's deeply satisfying. It makes me happy. Um, and at the same time, I'm one of those people, I'm sure you're this way too, Ilana, whose basic question is always, "What's next?"
Mhm.
What's on the horizon that needs addressing? But I do look back with, gratitude and with deep affection, for the folks I've had a chance to work with and the ways in which we have learned from each other. Because teaching and learning is always a two-way street. And I don't think you're a very good mentor if you aren't learning from your mentees, because it's the two-way thing that really brings teaching and learning alive, just as you're still quoting Patrick from when he was a fifth grader, right?
Our students are our greatest teachers. There's no question about that.
Exactly. So one thing that's been with me from the beginning of my work, um, and this takes us back to something that we touched on early on about the communal nature of teaching and learning, is that is that all good work is communal, all good work is relational. There's no way for me to do good work alone any more than there is to do ballroom dancing by myself.
Boring.
You need a you need a partner. Without it, it's just kind of weird. And so I've always understood legacy as something communal and collective, not as something personal. As you know, at a certain point, in fact, it was when I was 50, I began establishing something called the Center for Courage and Renewal, which is one of the ways in which I've put wheels on this work uh, for myself and for several hundred facilitators who have worked over the last 30 years with a lot of people in a variety of professions: medicine, K through 12 education, higher education, clergy, nonprofit leaders, philanthropists, young social change activists, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and when that organization said to me, "Well, how do you think of your legacy? You're the great grandfather by this time of an organization that has now had three generations of leadership, good leadership." I instantly said, "It's not my legacy; it's ours," because that's how I really experience it. Um, Community is a huge gift. Sometimes you can find it, sometimes you have to create it. Usually it's a mix of both. There's serendipity involved, but there's also intentionality, thoughtfulness, knowing how to hold a space that invites community to happen. So, yeah, when I am privileged to reconnect with folks like you, others I've worked with in this country, we now have a huge Courage to Teach movement in China, of all places,
Wow.
another very large movement in South Korea, other movements in Canada, Australia, all outgrowths of the Center for Courage and Renewal. So we have learned, as I'm sure you have too, that there are so many things in this work that cut across cultural barriers, so-called barriers, because it addresses something deeper in the human condition than our surface differences in language or appearance or philosophical conviction or whatever. Um, we go for the soul, we go for the heart, we go for the breathing, which everybody on earth does.
Yep. At Breathe for Change, my favorite practice is just 3 collective breaths. It's like, let's just we could do it together, Parker. Let's just take a deep breath in, deep breath out. Inhale, exhale. Breathe in, out with a huge sigh. It's just, we're not alone, right? We can breathe together, we can interact together, we can collaborate together, we can learn, teach together. It's so communal. And as you were speaking, I was just feeling so blessed because I was brought right back to December 10th, 2015. The reason I remember that day was because that was the day I met you in Georgia at one of your Courage to Lead workshops. I was like, I just started Breathe for Change that year. I was like, I know I need to keep growing and learning, and who do I want to learn from? Parker. And so I signed up for that retreat, and it was on my birthday that I met you the first day. And I had the way that you held space and everything was in a circle and it was all of us sharing about our lives and our inner worlds. And I was just so moved by not only like for the first time, like I'd read your books and I knew your heart from, you know, a physical paper, but I experiencing you in person and then having the opportunity to then I didn't even know you lived in the same city as I did. And then we got to meet at a cafe and like have these incredible conversations while I was getting my PhD and finishing that and like growing Breathe for Change. I just, you taught me and almost reinforced for me how important my own growth is as an educator for my own students' growth. And so I would, and I just saw like if as I keep growing and learning, then I'm inspiring those around me to keep growing and learning. And so I would love for you to talk about how do you like see that critical connection between educators' own, personal growth, not necessarily PD, like go learn math and science, but like personal transformational work and then their student outcomes. Like, what do you see as that connection?
Well, I think, students are very astute about who we are.
Yes. They know it all.
They really do. They
Whether or
just
not you say it, they see it.
yeah, and they may not say it, but they see it.
It's just like my little kids at home.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Oh,
You
yeah. They
well, you're
know.
you're a mom now and you know these things.
Got my babies.
Yeah, they're so sweet. They're just wonderful, wonderful. I cherish that family picture you sent me, Ilana. It's marvelous. Um, so if they can't see that we're growing, if they can't see that we value growth, what what motive would they have to grow or to value growth? So often we who teach, and this is why I so deeply admire these folks that I call first responders, who really are our first responders, because daily in K through 12 education, they're dealing with children in whose lives are manifesting all of the social ills that the grown-ups can't seem to find the wit or the will to solve. Um, and teachers are so often the first responder to the hurt, the moral injury, sometimes the physical injury, the food insufficiency. I mean, just the list goes on and on in the lives of these very vulnerable young people. So if we can model for them something beyond, you know, the struggles of the moment, if we can be that adult who is fully present in their lives in a way that gives them hope for something better, we've done something incredibly significant. You can't do that for everyone, and no teacher should ever feel that he or she has to do it for everyone. What we need are communities of teachers who understand that each has a different gift, each is capable of reaching a different kind of child, and each they each can complement the others in providing what a lot of children need. And it often is that one adult who cares about them in a way that isn't just mushy, but is practical and again has wheels on it, uh, giving these kids vehicles, life vehicles that they can take to destinations of their own choosing. That's the transcendent call of teaching, I think, and it you know it's a sacred vocation.
And today we're living in such a polarized, politicized world, and you know, I just so deeply believe, like you do, that educators are the heroes, right? It's like they're holding so much. They're not just teaching content, they're addressing mental health crises in schools, they're nurses, they're counselors, they're all the roles, like supportive cheerleaders, mentors, advisors, friends, everything. And I think with that, they're giving so much of themselves to others, and I think so often what we forget as educators is to give that same love and care to ourselves, right? And so what do you have to say about that?
Do it, just do it. Yeah, just do it. I mean, it is it is strange to me. I mean, it shouldn't be because I went through my own passage on this one, but it is strange to me that we don't understand how taking care of ourselves can be so important in the lives of the people we touch. Because when I've hurt people, when I've done damage with my life, it's precisely been at those times when I wasn't attending to my own well-being, and that would end up in me neglecting stuff or lashing out at times when that was not the appropriate response, et cetera, et cetera. It takes time to learn it, I guess, but it should be pretty obvious that that except for our sort of obsession with playing a role like everybody's caretaker, we really need to begin with taking care of ourselves in order to be able to take care of anybody else. And if that balance isn't constantly achieved in life, we get into trouble and so do the people whose lives we touch.
I remember my in my own classroom, I once, I ended up discovering so many of these mind body wellness practices because I was so stressed and overwhelmed and depressed and coming home crying on the couch every day, just feeling like, can I even do this anymore? Like so burnt out. It was just my first year of teaching. So my roommate introduced me to some of these practices. I was like, I don't do that. I'm an athlete. And then I like finally gave in when I was such a hot mess. And So my students, started telling my students, I'm doing these breathing practices, I'm practicing meditation, I'm doing some yoga, and I would do it every day before school. But then on some days, I wouldn't do it. And my kids would be like, Miss Ilana, did you forget to do your breathing this morning? I'm
Yeah,
like, oh my God, how'd you know? They just can sense it. Like when we're not well,
they get it.
they're not well and they know.
They are the canaries in the coal mine, you know?
Totally.
They know when things are getting tough.
They know. And then, and my dissertation only further revealed that critical connection between educator well-being and student well-being and their academic outcomes.
Mhm.
And so it starts with us as teachers, really asking ourselves, what is it that I need right now to have my cup full so that I can do the critically important work that I'm here to do in the world?
Yeah, and I think that depends, not only on self-care as we rightly understand it. I mean, taking time to stare out the window every now and then and not always staring at our screens or getting up in the middle of work for a 3 or 4-minute, uh, physical break of some sort, et cetera, diet, exercise, at the simplest level, all of those things. There are things I can't do in terms of exercise, for example, at age 86, but I can still walk a mile and a half or 2 miles a day, and I do it,
Go, Parker.
even in Wisconsin's really miserable winter.
I gotta come visit you soon and go on. Not in this winter, though. I'll wait till the winter's done.
You're in California, so enjoy. But it also seems to me that we have to do things like value every small step we're able to make forward. So many of us value only the big steps, and one of the things I learned in clinical depression is value the little things, because if you keep doing them, you are on a path out of this darkness into something new. And so whether it's personal growth or social change, it always builds on a million small steps. Value each and every one of them and don't feel that you're doing nothing. The other thing we need to remember is we can't do any of this alone. That's been a running theme in this conversation, Ilana. So build community, be intentional and conscious about connecting with people who share your fundamental values in education, people with whom you can tell your life story, with whom you can listen to theirs, people with whom you can build a sense of belonging that we all need to sustain us in the hard work of these times.
So beautiful, Parker. And I know, you've been just a huge leader in this field for what is it, over 50 years at this point? It's incredible, Parker, so inspiring. And, as you're coming towards like the end of your career, you've gained all this wisdom, this knowledge along the way. What at this stage, what insights, what perspectives, what advice do you have for the incredible educators doing the most important work in the world out there, at this point? I know this might be one of your last interviews, who knows? Because you're, s you know, paying attention now to other things, but what do you have to say to our teachers at this point?
Yeah, I'm no good at final messages.
No, this isn't gonna be your last message. I'm just saying at this point, 86-year-old Parker, what with all the wisdom that you've carried over these decades, what feels true for you right now? What's your truth? I'll bring it back to truth. What's your truth right now for our teachers?
I understand. I really am. So I'm not good at saying goodbye to things I don't want to say goodbye to. So, you understand what I mean. Um, but I think know that you are valued. Know that you are treasured. Know that you are loved. Um, I don't think um, I don't think there's a more important message for anyone to embrace and understand. Um, I have a a personal quirky little bias toward the notion that we are somehow loved by the cosmos itself. We we are upheld in a vast web of being that is so far beyond our understanding, um, that we cannot deal with it through cognitive rationality or logic or data collection or anything along those lines. It has to be intuited, it has to be felt, it has to be received in dreams and visions. It has to be a bodily experience. And breathing in and breathing out isn't a bad place to start, uh, to realize that this is the rhythm of the cosmos itself, always has been, this continual act of creation and co-creation that we are involved in. And, when we're not capable, on those dark days, and I know all about them, to this day I have them, especially under current political conditions, as recently as this week in which you and I are talking. When we're not capable of feeling that love, it feels like, are you kidding? A cosmos that loves us in the midst of this madness, in the midst of this lethality and this disregard for the sacred preciousness of human life. At times when we're not capable of meditating or mindfulness or any traditional practice that brings us the belief, that returns us to the belief that we are loved and sustained, I find there's a very simple thing I can do, and that is to go out and offer love in some form to the next person I encounter. Maybe it's the clerk at the grocery store. Maybe it's the attendant of the gas station. Maybe it's the woman who checks me in for my doctor's appointment. But if I can somehow express gratitude to that person, if I can say a positive word to that person, if I can live as if that web of love and support were real, it becomes easier for me to see it and feel it. It becomes more real for me to live in it. So keep it on the ground, I say, and keep putting one foot in front of the other. Keep breathing, keep loving, and keep teaching. We need you.
Parker, what you've just done is such an act of love for not only me, oh, what a gift it was for me to have this conversation, but also for every single educator who is listening to this or will get to listen to this, because you are a treasure to us all. And I just want to thank you so deeply for your vulnerability, because I think the reason why at least I've become who I've become, and I know, the ripple effect is huge, right? To every educator's whose life you've touched. It's because we've seen someone be vulnerable, and in your vulnerability, we've cracked open ourselves. And I am so grateful. Every single night my daughter and I exchange 3 things that we're grateful for. And last night I was telling Aaliyah, I was like, "I am so grateful that tomorrow I get to talk to my greatest teacher. Like your teacher, Joy. I get to talk to my teacher, Parker." And I just really hope that and can feel inside your being and your bones the impact that you've had on millions. And I promise that I will continue, at least for the rest of my life, to carry forth the teachings that you've instilled in me, because It's what gives me life. It's what wakes me up every morning. It's what fuels my passion and my purpose. And so I'm just eternally grateful for you. And I love you dearly. So thank you for taking this time, even when you said no, it's you broke your own rules. You're not doing these things anymore. I see this as a true gift.
I'm really glad I did. I knew I would be, Ilana. So I'll just sign off with great, great love to you, to your family, to your colleagues, and to all the teachers whose lives you touch. Love and blessings and much, much gratitude.
Thank you, Parker. You're the best.